Tonight we are starting our ongoing evening marathon of theory and poetry and films, etc. And as it is rightfully so for EGS, we start with theory, but not with the kind of theory you can learn in universities in your undergraduate studies. But the kind of theory you only are exposed to after you have known too much already and are very in need of forgetting, opening, and hear things you would never have thought of this in this way. Oh my God, really? So, and sometimes, that's the funny thing of me, even a guy who is a very professor, I think, tenured professor at Duke University, one of the best places in the United States, etc. No idea how they tenured him there, but sometimes it has happened because it is possible to be in the system at a certain place, have a niche there, and still keep your rebellious mind, keep your openness for new questions, and sometimes even in his case he gave us a strong new answer too. So I'm always very surprised what he's doing, so I have no idea what's going on tonight, but I welcome Michael Hardt.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming. The title of the presentation is The Common in Communism. And so those are the two terms I want to talk about, common and communism. Okay, here's where it starts. The economic and financial crisis of last fall 2008, resulted in an extraordinarily rapid sea change in the realm of political imaginaries. Just as a few years ago, talk of climate change was ridiculed and dismissed in the mainstream media as exaggerated and apocalyptic, but then almost from one day to the next, the fact of climate change became the nearly universal common sense. So too, the economic and financial crisis has rearranged the dominant views of capitalism and socialism. Over a year ago, any critique of neoliberal strategies of deregulation, privatization, and the reduction of welfare structures, let alone capital itself, was cast in the dominant media as crazy talk. Just last spring, however, Newsweek could proclaim on its cover with only partial irony, "We're all socialists now." In fact, there was a Pew Foundation poll last spring in the U.S. asking U.S.ers if they thought capitalism or socialism was a better economic system. And capitalism still won, 53% to 47%. But it seems an extraordinarily rapid change about the views of capitalism and socialism. The rule of capital is suddenly open to question from left and right, and some form of socialist or Keynesian state regulation and management seems inevitable. I think we need to look, however, outside of this alternative. Too often it appears as though our only choices are capitalism or socialism, that is, the rule of private property or the rule of public property, such that the only cure for the ills of state control is to privatize, and the only cure for the ills of capital is to publicize, that is, to exert state regulation. I think that we need to explore another possibility, neither the private property of capitalism nor the public property of socialism, but the common in communism. That's what I want to talk about. Many central concepts of our political vocabulary, including communism, as well as democracy and freedom, have been so corrupted that they're almost unusable today. In fact, the last time I spoke here, and I was thinking about this today, I was trying to talk about love as a political concept in the way that love, too, has been corrupted and made unusable as a political concept. In standard usage, in fact, communism has come to mean its opposite. That is this better? Okay. Should I talk different or hold it? No. We're okay? It's okay. Okay. In common dominant usage, communism has come to mean what I think of as its opposite. In other words, total state control over economics and social life. We could abandon these terms. In other words, this is a way in which I see the term communism, like other terms like freedom, democracy. Yeah, what do I mean by that? You know, I don't know if you remember, or maybe you didn't listen to Bush's second inaugural address, in which he repeated over and over again freedom and democracy, using it in ways that seem to me completely opposite of what I understand freedom and democracy to mean. I think it's similarly with communism, a term in our political vocabulary which has, like I say, been corrupted, or I mean inverted from what I consider its meaning. So how do we react to such corruption of our political vocabulary? One thing one could do is abandon these terms and invent new ones. But of course, in doing so, in addition to annoying people, because people get annoyed when you invent new terms, but it also would involve abandoning the long history of struggles and dreams and aspirations that are tied to these terms, to freedom, democracy, communism too. And so in many cases, in this case in particular, I think it's better to fight over the concepts themselves and to restore or renew their meaning. In the case of communism, this requires two things, it seems to me: an analysis of the forms of political organization that are possible today, and before that, an investigation of the nature of contemporary economic and social production. So what I want to talk about tonight is really the second, which is the first in the sequential order of these. That is, the nature of economics and social production, and in a way set aside, or we can talk about later, what the then subsequent organizational project would have to be. Okay, that'll become clear as I talk if that didn't make sense. One of the reasons that the communist hypotheses of previous eras are no longer valid today is that the composition of capital, as well as the conditions and products of capitalist production, have changed. Most importantly, the technical composition of labor has changed. In other words, how do people produce both inside and outside the workplace? What do they produce and under what conditions? How is productive cooperation organized? And what are the divisions of labor and power that separate them along gender and racial lines in the local, regional, and global contexts? In addition to investigating the current composition of labor, we have to analyze also the relations of property under which labor produces. Along with Marx, one could say that the critique of political economy is at its heart a critique of property. Or as Marx and Engels say in the Communist Manifesto, the theory of communists can be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. So in fact, that's really, I said I was going to talk about the common and communism. What I'm really going to talk about mostly is property, the critique of property. In order to explore the relationship and struggle between property and the common, the way I want to do it is read two passages from Marx's 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts. By referring to the manuscripts, Marx's early work, I don't intend to pose the early Marx against the late Marx, to celebrate Marx's humanism, or anything of the sort. I consider these arguments as ones that go throughout Marx's work, and it's not even so much that I feel the need to, refer to the master on this. It's partly that the manuscripts provide an occasion for reading the common in communism, which I think is increasingly relevant today, but it also allows us to measure the distance between Marx's time and our own. Another thing, maybe this is purely selfish and personal, is that these are two passages in Marx's manuscripts that this notion of the common allows me to read differently. One passage, the first one I'll talk about, which I had found exceedingly boring, and now I can find interesting. The second one I found completely obscure, and now I think I have a way of understanding it. So here's the first passage. It's in a section titled The Relation of Private Property. Marx poses a periodization in this section that highlights the dominant forms of property in the two eras, in the previous era and in the mid-19th century when he's writing. In the mid-19th century, he claims, European societies are no longer primarily dominated by immobile property, that is, such as land, but instead by mobile property, generally the results of industrial production. You could think of commodities as mobile property in this sense. The period of transition is characterized by a bitter battle between the two forms of property. And in typical fashion, Marx mocks the claims to social good of both property owners. So let me explain a little bit Marx's own narrative of this conflict and his personification of the two property owners. The landowner emphasizes the productivity of agriculture and its vital importance for society, as well as, and here Marx is mocking the landowner, he writes, the noble lineage of his property, the feudal reminiscences, the poetry of remembrance, his high-flown nature, his political importance, etc. The owner of movable property, in contrast, attacks